Hello citizens and welcome back. In today's video I want to talk about inventory changes coming in 3.24, development of inventory access over the years, and how the next iteration affects gameplay. As always, if you like this video, sacrifice a like and a comment to the YouTube algorithm and subscribe for more. And here's a shout out to our amazing patrons for their support of the channel and the Armory. Over the last few years, inventory and how we interact with inventory and Star Citizen has gone through a couple of changes. Some of you may remember the inventory access before local inventory. Your character's current and available equipment was managed inside your Mobby Glass. This was actually before local inventory was a thing, so everything you owned was accessible everywhere, meaning that you could change your armor or weapons on the fly all the time. Which was also the main problem of this system, because Star Citizen was always supposed to have a local inventory, which would force you to either take everything you need with you when you go out or pre-position it beforehand. On the other hand, the great part about this system was the interface. While it did use the old Mobby Glass and wasn't quite as performant as we're used to now, it offered a nice, streamlined and text-based interface, where you would see the available equipment slots and what fits into that slot, as well as the preview of the selected item. And it was actually a very simple and elegant way to manage what your character has equipped. Then came local inventory, and with this came the new interface as we know it in 3.23. Rather than being a part of your Mobby Glass, it's now a separate interface similar to other games. The key difference was that you could only access your character's inventory or the available local inventories, which could be the location or the vehicle you're in or the container you're looting. So any items you want to use would have to be in one of those local inventories or your character inventory. This also brought in the strategic play of having to pre-position items to the landing zone or stations you were operating from, which moved us closer to the originally presented concept of inventory. But it's also where things started to break down. The new interface moved away from the text-based display and instead went for small 3D representations of stored objects as well as a drag and drop equip and unequip. But it's also worth mentioning that there is a double-click option to equip the selected item. Now, this new inventory system was missing some critical features at launch and still has some issues. In some cases, item previews don't display correctly, and unequipping stuff with drag and drop is a pain. But the 3.23 state of the inventory system is actually pretty good, though it took a year to get a transfer all button and we still don't have a proper search function or stack all function. And while this system is much closer to the original idea of physicalized inventory, it still had that unrealistic component of items magically appearing, which CIG consider not immersive. Then the new looting UI came out, which adds a layer over the local inventory to speed up looting enemies and containers and make the UI less obstructive, which it really doesn't. But it's still a nice piece of UI, which does a good job of showing what is equipped where and where you can put looted items, and I believe that there is still some polishing to be done there. And now we get to 3.24 and the latest iteration of inventory. And to understand why this change was made, we have to go back to how inventory and persistence work in Star Citizen. You can essentially split Star Citizen into two parallel dimensions, virtual and physical. Physical is everything you see and can interact with in the verse, so locations, ships, items, and other players. Virtual is everything that's not present in the verse, so items and ships that are stored, players that are offline, and object containers that are not streamed in, but also the persistent database and other data points. Every entity in Star Citizen can freely move between these two dimensions, whether through object container streaming or some other variant of persistent stow and unstow operations. And this process of physicalization and virtualization of entities is the magic appearing and disappearing of items, ships, or players. And CIG are trying to solve this problem by hiding this process behind a physical entity. For ships, it's the ship elevators and persistent hangars. For cargo, it's cargo elevators and loading timers. And for items, it's inventory kiosks. Now, these three actually have a lot in common in how they work. They use an intermediate space between the physical world and the virtual storage. Retrieving ships is the simplest of the three, where you just call up your ship and the animation plays out. The ship appearing out of nowhere is hidden by the closed elevator. With cargo, things are getting more complicated. To retrieve your cargo using the elevator, you first have to set it up onto the cargo elevator using the cargo console, and then call the elevator up and then load your cargo using your tractor beam. Alternatively, you can have your cargo loaded automatically for a fee and with a timer while your ship is in storage. Both of these options hide the magic appearance of the cargo. The interesting part here is that you can call up any items from your storage, so that can be hangar flare, ship components, armor, and anything else that can be physicalized. This feature actually achieves two things. It implements the desired cargo management gameplay and through that enables new gameplay loops like cargo hauling, but it also solves the problem of cargo magically appearing in your ship. And the cargo terminal also allows you to manage the contents of containers, which will become interesting in a moment. And that leaves us with personal inventory. CAG decided to follow the same design approach as with cargo elevators. You open the inventory kiosk, you move items from storage into the drawer, and then when you're ready you open the drawer, which opens the old inventory UI, except with the drawer contents being the local inventory, and then you equip the items. And that's where everything goes wrong. If you're dragging and dropping the items in the kiosk into the drawer and then onto your character, you are essentially doing the same thing twice for no added benefit. Also, if you happen to change your mind during the process of equipping, you have to go back to the kiosk and start over, which makes it much more difficult and time-consuming to see what different loadouts look like. So, do inventory kiosks solve the issue of items appearing out of thin air? Well, yes, but actually no. Yes, because to get to your items you have to interact with a physical object, but no, because to an outside observer the items still appear out of nowhere. But that's not a huge problem. But I think that every location having dozens of consoles that can dispense any item from my storage is less believable than the ever-present local inventory. But again, in the grand scheme of things, not that bad. The big problem is that the drawer essentially doubles the amount of actions a player has to take to manage their inventory with no added benefit. And this is actually becoming a larger problem within the whole game, adding tedious actions and time sinks with little benefit for the players. And as a side note, in order to make inventory access more available, CAG are putting in dozens of inventory kiosks everywhere, which actually ruins the visual cohesion of pretty much every location, which is quite disrespectful to the environment designers who made these areas. Now, it is entirely possible that the way of retrieving items from storage requires this intermediate step to facilitate physicalization, and that's okay, but clearly there is a way to make that step seamless as is shown by ship elevators. Also, I know that some of you are going to point out, if I hate the kiosk so much, I can just put all my armor and gear into a crate, retrieve it with the cargo elevator, and just use the inventory UI to equip it. But I have a counterpoint for you. Not only does doing this add a ton of complexity and extra steps, but also if I have to use a workaround to avoid using a system specifically designed to do what I'm trying to do, is that system really good? So let that sink in for a moment. Now, is all lost? No. So let's talk about how inventory kiosks can be saved. First of all, limiting access to your storage is not a bad idea. It promotes tactical and decision-driven gameplay that CAG claim to want. But at the same time, you have to do this in a way that doesn't inconvenience the player and doesn't put more time strain on their gameplay. So what can CAG do? Well, the easiest and simplest solution is to just get rid of the inventory kiosks. Now, I know that sounds a bit counterproductive, but along with removing the kiosks, I would limit access to player storage to your hab or your hangar or your ship. And I would use the 323 ever-present inventory UI, just limit it to certain locations. This keeps the concept of decision-driven gameplay and limiting access to inventory and not inconveniencing the player. But to be fair, this doesn't solve the issue of items magically appearing. But if you limit access to habs and hangars and other areas where player is more likely to be alone, it kind of hides the problem. But it's pretty unlikely that CIG will want to get rid of inventory kiosks altogether, so what they can do to improve them? Well, we've established that the primary issues with the kiosks are the intermediate drawer step and that they're everywhere, ruining the look of locations. The second issue is very easy to solve, simply reducing the number of kiosks present in the verse. I think it should be enough if there is one in your hab, your hangar, and maybe inside or near shops. They could also be moved to the locker room areas of space stations, which would actually thematically make sense. The drawer is a bit more complicated. If the intermediate step is necessary for the tech to work, we need to find some way to execute it without the player needing to do the drag and drop interaction again. In that case, the intermediate step is likely to hide the commit action of a transaction that retrieves items from persistent storage and physicalizes them. But technically this can be done with a button. So what we could do is rework the inventory kiosk UI to look and function like the old Mobiglass UI. You would select the gear you want to equip for each equipment slot and transfer any items you want to add into the backpacks and pockets, and then click a button that would equip and transfer the selected items. This not only removes the intermediate step, but can also be implemented as a more performant and readable text-based UI. If the immediate step is not necessary, then we have to ask ourselves why it was implemented in the first place. At the same time, the solution outlined a moment ago still works. Ultimately, the bane of inventory kiosks as they are is an overly complicated UI and user flow, which adds no value but slows down player actions. And while this is the first iteration, CIG need to take a look at player feedback and implement quality of life changes to the new system. In my opinion, inventory is one of the primary systems that players interact with in Star Citizen, and such systems should work so well that the user barely notices that they are there. A great example for me is the new EVA system released in 3.23, but it feels like it's always been there and that I've been using it for years. And with that being said, that's all for today. What do you think? Do inventory kiosks add value? How would you fix them? Let me know in the comments. Also, I wanted to let you know that my call-in live show, the Com Relay, is coming back this weekend, so join us on stream or as a caller. Thank you for watching, fly safe, and I will see you in the verse.